Alright y'all, welcome back to the channel and to another turkey pattern test video here. And today we've got a really interesting shell and a pretty highly requested shell to test out as well. So after the video I put out several days ago of testing my grandfather's hand-loaded goose shells from the mid-80s, I'll leave a card above for that one if you haven't seen it. I highly suggest going to check that one out because it was a really interesting test. But either way, I mentioned in that video that I had a couple other shells of his that he hand-loaded, some duck and some turkey loads, and you guys really wanted to see the other duck and turkey loads, so I figured I'd grab some of the turkey loads and come out here today and test them for you and see what he was actually capable of hand loading back in the 80s for a turkey. Now those shells are currently in this box right here, Winchester Ranger Mark V box, but that's not exactly what's in the box. As you can see, hand marked here on the top, these are a 3-inch, 1.5 ounce load of number 4s. And on top of that, they are not actually plastic shells. They are hand loaded into some of these shells. These are paper Winchester double-aught buck super speed shells. But these are actually paper turkey load cartridges that he did use. And hand loaded these himself in, I guarantee you, a not very ideal hand loading setup. So they are really unique and really interesting shells. And as for myself, I've never tested a paper hull turkey load before. But as for a turkey shell and a hand load on top of that, this is something really different and really unique. But as for what I'm going to test it out of today, I figured I would run it through the turkey setup that I know best. That setup being the Remington 1187 Premier, with my tried and true Kicks Gobblin Thunder. That's a 655 constriction, so definitely a little bit on the tighter end for a lot of turkey chokes. But that 655 has done me very well with just about anything I've put through it that's not just a completely junk shell. So before we do anything, we're going to run up to a table I've got set up right up here on the back porch, and we're going to cut one of these shells open and see what is inside of it and how he loaded it. Because I really think that is probably going to be pretty interesting, especially since they're an old hand-loaded paper shell. So let's run up there and cut one of these open and see what's inside real quick before we test them. Alright, so here's our shell that we're going to cut open here. So I'm going to cut this open and see what is actually inside of these shells. Alright, so here's what the inside of that shell looks like. On the left there, you see all of the number 4 shot. And here we have our powder. It's kind of an interesting looking powder. I'm no expert here, but it's tiny little flakes. If somebody knows what this powder is just by looking at it, then let me know, because I really don't know exactly what it is. But as for the actual shell, here's the paper hull that we cut open here, so you can see that it absolutely is paper. Now as for how this was loaded, he had powder down in the base here, then he had this piece of plastic. Now it was flipped where the flat side of it was up, just like that. On top of that, he had this little fiber material looking piece of buffer sitting right on top of that. And on top of that, he had this little clear piece of plastic that you can clearly see he hand cut with probably his pocket knife, if I had to take a guess. And he had it sitting right on top of here just like that. And that is what his shot was inside of. So I don't even know that I would call that a wad necessarily. It's just a plain old piece of plastic cut and surrounded all of his pellets inside of that shell. A really interesting design, and I don't know how this is going to perform. So let's go over there and test it and see how they do. Alright, now I'm going to head over to 40 yards. I am going to add the chronograph in this time, and I'm going to start doing that for all of my turkey pattern tests as long as I can. So let's head over here and shoot these and see how my grandfather's turkey loads from 35 years ago did. Alright, so that shell gave us a velocity of 1,285 feet per second. So definitely loaded a little bit hotter than what I was expecting it to be. Alright y'all, so this is what we got out of his hand-loaded turkey shells from the mid-80s. Now as you can clearly see right off the bat, This is no comparison whatsoever to a modern turkey load. There's just no comparison here to something loaded in today's times with the technology that we have. But with that being said, this is still a dead turkey at 40 yards. You do have two that are definite spine hits right there, and several more that are right in the head and neck area here. Now, yes, we don't necessarily have a definite core here, and it is open, there's no question there. But you could definitely take a turkey inside of 40 at that. I wouldn't push it any farther than that, but for the technology and the information and the availability of different things that he had back then, this probably was about what could be expected out of a turkey load in the early, mid, maybe late 80s time frame there. Now I'm curious to what something like a 665 would do, or a 675, 680 type range in the 835. I don't know how much better we're going to get over this necessarily. Maybe we might be able to see a little bit better, but that is still definitely a dead bird at 40 yards. I wouldn't push it any farther past there, but for how he loaded these in a paper shell with really no wad at all, it was just a piece of plastic wrapped around the shot, I'm not too terribly disappointed in that. That's kind of about what I expected to see. And I know that he did take a few turkeys with this load 35 years ago. Not very many from what I do know, but he did take at least 2 or 3 of them. All right, well, what do y'all think about my grandfather's hand-loaded turkey loads in a paper shell? Being a 35-year-old hand load with the technology that was available back then, I'm not too displeased with that. That's about what I expected to see. Now, I was not around back then, so if some of you guys played around with hand loads and different turkey loads and stuff like that back in the 80s, is that about what you expected out of a turkey load, or were there other loads that gave you a little bit better performance? But should we test these loads in the 835 Ultimag and maybe a couple different chokes? I don't have very many of these shells left, so I can't test them through everything I've got. But should we run them through a few different setups to see what they might be capable of in different scenarios? But either way, leave me a comment and let me know what you think about these. But on that note, thank y'all for the likes and the subscribes and the comments and all that stuff. I really do like reading through them and seeing what your thoughts are about especially loads like this. So stick around because we got plenty more tests coming. So with that being said, I'm going to get back to doing some testing, and I'll see y'all in the next one.